St. John's Gospel, chapter 6. A sign for the hungry, verses 1 to 15. Afterwards, Jesus crossed the Sea of Galilee, otherwise known as the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd continued following him because they saw the signs he was performing on the sick. Jesus climbed the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. It was Jewish Passover time. Jesus looked up and saw a huge crowd streaming towards him. He says to Philip, "Where can we find bread to feed them?" Now he said this to test him, because he knew what he was going to do. "Well," answered Philip, 8 months' wages won't buy enough bread for each of them to have even a morsel. Just then, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, one of the disciples, says to him, "There's a young lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what's that among so many?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." It was a very grassy area, so the menfolk sat down, about 5,000 of them. Jesus took the bread, and after he had given thanks, he distributed it among those who were sitting down, and also the fish. When they had had enough, Jesus says to his disciples, "Make sure you pick up all the leftovers, leave nothing behind." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that Jesus had done, they began to say, "Truly, this is the prophet who's to come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were planning to seize him forcibly and make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain alone. A sign on the water, verses 16 to 23. At sunset, his disciples went down to the sea, got into their boat, and began to sail to Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had still not joined them. A gale was starting to whip up the waters. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles out to sea, they clapped eyes on Jesus advancing towards them on foot. They froze in terror. But Jesus says to them, "Don't panic, it's only me." They welcomed him into the boat, and before they knew it, they had reached their destination. The next morning, the crowd that had been standing on the other side of the shore noticed that there had only been a small boat there, and that Jesus had not got into it with his disciples who had left without him. However, there were small boats from Tiberias that came near to the place where the people had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. The bread of life, verses 24 to 53. Now, when the crowd saw that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the small boats and came to Capernaum, searching for him. And when they found him on the other side, they said, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" Jesus says, "I know you're seeking me not because of the signs you saw, but because you ate your fill of the bread. Don't labor for the food that perishes, but for the food that lasts forever. The Son of Man will give it to you, because it's on him that God the Father has set his seal of approval." So they said to him, "What do we have to do in order to perform God's works?" Jesus replied, "Don't worry about works. Your job simply to believe in the one sent by God." And they said, "What sign can you show us so that we may see it and put our trust in you? What miraculous deed can you perform?" "Our fathers ate manna in the desert, as Scripture records. He gave them manna from heaven to eat." "Listen to me carefully," said Jesus. "It wasn't Moses who gave you manna from heaven. It's my Father who continues to give you the real bread from above. For the bread which God gives is the one who comes down from heaven, and it's this bread that gives life to the world." "Well, Master," they said, "then keep on giving us this bread." "I am the bread of life," said Jesus. "Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever has faith in me will never thirst again." But as I've already made clear, although you've seen me, you don't believe in me. Everyone that the Father gives to me will come to me, and whoever comes to me I'll never turn away. For I've come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of the one who sent me. And this is his will, that I should lose none of those that he's given me, and that I should raise them up on the last day. This is what my Father wants, that everyone who sees the Son and comes to have faith in him should have eternal life, and I'll raise him up on the last day. When they heard this, the Jews began to grumble among themselves, because he said, "I am the bread which came down from heaven." "Isn't this Jesus, the son of Joseph?" they asked. "Don't we know his father and his mother? How, for goodness sake, can he say, 'I've come down from heaven'?" "Stop muttering among yourselves," said Jesus. "No one's able to come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I'll raise him up on the last day. It says in the prophets, they will all be taught by God. All you've heard and learned from the Father came to me. Not that anyone has actually seen the Father, except the one who's from God. He alone has seen the Father. Let me assure you, whoever believes has eternal life. I am indeed the bread of life. Your fathers ate manna in the desert and died. But here's the bread that comes down from heaven. If anyone eats it, they won't die. I am the life-giving bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. And the bread that I give for the life of the world is my own flesh." This was too much for the Jews, who began arguing with each other. "How can he give us his flesh to eat?" Jesus addressed them. "Listen, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you're spiritually dead. Anyone who feeds on my flesh and drinks my blood will live forever, and I'll raise him up on the last day. Because my flesh is real food, and my blood is real drink. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in them. For just as the Father who lives sent me, and I live because of the Father, so whoever feeds on me will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven. It bears no resemblance to the bread your fathers ate, yet still died. Whoever feeds on this bread will live forever." Jesus said these things when he was teaching in the synagogue at Capernaum. So when many of his followers heard this, they said, "This teaching is very hard. Who can stomach it?" But Jesus, aware that his followers were moaning, said, "Are you shocked? Then what if you were to see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? It's the Spirit that gives life. The flesh is worthless. Can't you see that it's the life-giving Spirit that I'm speaking about? But there are some of you who simply don't believe." He knew from the outset those who would not believe and who it was that would betray him. He went on, "This is why I've said to you, nobody can come to me unless it's been determined by the Father." Because of this, some of his followers turned back and no longer accompanied him. Therefore Jesus said to the 12, "You don't want to desert me like the others, do you?" "Master," Simon Peter said, "to whom would we go? You've got the words of eternal life, and we've come to believe and know that you're the Holy One of God." Jesus replied, "Didn't I choose you, the 12, and yet one of you is a devil?" This was a reference to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, one of the 12, who was about to betray him. That's my reading of my translation of John chapter 6, published by Matador, also, by the way, on Kindle, and of course you can get it via Amazon, either the hard copy or the Kindle copy, and all profits go to Christian charities.